Okay, so also it's good to know that we're going to be recording this, because if you are really late or early in your time zone and you feel like going to sleep, no worries, you're going to have access to the recording afterwards. Before we get started with the session today, just a reminder that we are abiding by the friendly space policy. And basically, we aim to provide a harassment-free experience for everyone at this event. So if you experience any form of harassment or or you feel uncomfortable with any situation, please let us know and we'll take actions to solve the situation. Where will you find the recording? We are having a Web2Cit YouTube playlist. Actually, you can have access to all of our previous videos there, and I'll share the link in just a sec. Also, we are having a document with notes that I just pasted on the side chat, and you can leave your email there. If you like to receive updates about the project, we'll send as soon as we have any updates. And if you want to leave any comments or notes on the document, you can do so there in the doc. And that's all on my side. I'll pass it on to Diego, who is actually the one that is going to be presenting today and leading the workshop. And also, please, Diego, go ahead and introduce yourself too. And thanks everyone for being here too.
Thank you very much, Evelyn. And also thank you very much for being here today. My name is Diego de la Era. I am the project manager of Web2Cit and also the lead developer of Web2Cit. Evelyn is our communications and community leader. So today I will start sharing my screen right now. So today this is our first workshop of Web2Cit. Let me move there. Okay, just 1 second. All right. So I'm sure you got on the email a link to this webpage. We are going to be using a resource that you will find on that webpage. So just have it handy. Not right now, but we will need a resource from that webpage in a minute. So what is Web2Cit? Web2Cit is a tool to improve the capacity of Wikipedia's automatic citation generator to understand web sources. So let's make this clearer. I'm here in my Wikipedia sandbox. So let's imagine that I want to add a reference to this web page, this newspaper article. So many of you may know that if I copy the URL and I go in my visual editor here where it says cite, if I enter the URL and click on generate, it will generate a citation automatically. This is using something that it's called Citoid, which is a Wikimedia service, which in turn is using some software from Zotero, another free software project. But in some cases, the automatic generator fails to get correct metadata for the web sources. So for example, in this case, the title, it got it correctly, and it also got the name of the newspaper right. But then it thinks it's a website, but we know that it's a newspaper article, and it didn't get the author name, which in our website is down here, and it didn't get the publication date either. So until now, the only way to fix this was we either would go ahead and enter the information manually, or we could, if we knew some JavaScript, we would go to the Zotero project and we would have to fix or write a new translator, but that requires JavaScript knowledge. So the aim of the Web2Cit project is to lower the barrier so that people that have some technical skills but are not so technically skilled or don't know how to program, so that these people can help improve the citation generator. And even for those of you who know how to program, in some cases you might find this way easier than going than fixing the JavaScript translator. I wanted to note that this is not meant to be a replacement of the automatic citation generator. It is meant to be a complement. That is, the extraction procedures that we will be able to collaboratively define through Web2Cit are meant to be a temporary patch until someone can fix the Zotero translator, the Cytoid service for that source. But because that might take some time, we will have this possibility to make it faster. Oh, by the way, in the context of Web2Cit, whenever I say translation, I'm usually referring to metadata extraction from web sources. I'm not meaning translation from one language to another. So before getting started, I need to show you.
Maybe it's a good time to see if anyone has any questions, if all of this is clear for everyone.
Thank you, Evelyn.
Yeah, and also remember that you can raise your hand at any point if there's something that you don't understand or want further clarification. Just raise your hand or unmute yourself and ask any questions. Okay, we don't have any questions. Or also feel free to ask them in the chat if you don't feel comfortable speaking. Go ahead. Sorry for that.
No, thank you. So before getting started, I would like to explain a little bit how Web2Cit works, because understanding how Web2Cit works is fundamental to understanding how to use it. So even before getting started with that, just as a reminder, if we have this is a URL which points to a web resource. If we have a URL, this part here is what we call the domain, and this part here is what we call, oops, sorry, my keyboard got crazy. Going back, I'm sorry. So this part here in pink is what we call the path of the web page. So for example, if we're working with a newspaper, the domain will never change. It's going to be always the same. What's going to change is the path to the specific article of the newspaper we're working with. So in Web2Cit, we define configuration. In Web2Cit, we configure translation on a per domain basis. So we have a configuration for this domain, but we also have a separate configuration for this other domain and a separate configuration for this other domain. And within each domain, we will define a series of translation templates. And a translation template is simply a web page in the domain that we will use as a template for translation. Okay, so we may have one or multiple translation templates, multiple web pages serving as templates for translation. And within each template, we will have fields. Yeah, so we will have fields corresponding to each citation field. So for example, we will have a field for the item type. We might have web pages, we might have newspaper articles, and so on. And on the other hand, we may also have fields, for example, for the title, the title of the source, and so on. We have fields for author names, fields for publication dates. Now, each of these fields, will accept a specific output. Yeah, so for example, if it is a title, we will not be accepting something that looks like a date. Or if it is a date, we will not accept anything. We will accept something that looks like a date. We will. I will come back to this later, but be aware that each field is expecting a specific type of output. Yeah. So within each field, we are going to say whether this field is required or not. I will come back with this in a moment. Just don't worry. And within each field, we are going to define a procedure. The procedure is a series of instructions to get the metadata out of the web source. Yeah, so for example, if we want to know what the item type is for a web source, we will define a procedure to get that out from the web page. So we may have one or more procedures per field, but we usually have just one, okay? Now, within a procedure, we will see this in detail later on. We will actually practice with this, but let me give you this overview first. So within each procedure, you will have a series of selection steps. And these selection steps are used to identify the parts of the web page that have the information that I need. So for example, if I go back to my sample web page, if I am working with the item title, I would like to select this thing here, because this is where the title is located in my web page, for example. And afterwards, because sometimes the information on the web page is not on the format that the field that I'm working with would accept it, we may apply some transformation steps onto the selection steps, okay? But again, if you think you're a little bit lost here, just bear with me for a couple of minutes when we will be working with a specific exercise. And in addition, just for you to know, we may remember that we had the configuration in Web2Cit was on a per domain basis, but we may still create like subgroups for translation within each domain. We're going to call those URL path patterns. Okay, so for example, we have here a URL path pattern that says /news/wildcard. So any web page whose path matches this pattern, it's going to be grouped within that pattern. And we always have a catch-all pattern that's going to catch all web pages, no matter what their URL path pattern looks like, in case other patterns don't catch it. So let me give you an example here, and then we can stop a little bit for questions. So let's imagine that we have this URL here on the left, and we want Web2Cit to translate this URL. That means we want Web2Cit to extract the metadata for that URL. So the first thing that Web2Cit does is it checks the domain of the URL. So in this case, we're working with a URL whose domain is www.example.com. Then Web2Cit checks whether it has a configuration for that domain, whether any of Web2Cit collaborators have defined a configuration for that domain. And in this case, in this example, yes, Web2Cit does have a configuration for this domain. So it will only use the configurations for that domain. It will ignore any other configurations it may have. Then it checks the path of the target web page. In this case, it's /news/opinion. So it's going to check if this path matches any of the URL path patterns that we have defined. And in this case, yes, it matches this pattern, because /news/opinion looks like /news/a-wildcard, yeah? And then it will try one by one the translation templates that we have defined for this domain. And it's gonna try one by one until it finds one that it is applicable. And we say that a translation template is applicable for a target web page when it happens to be that for all fields that we marked as required, the field returns a valid output. That is an output that is compatible with the field. So for example, remember that we could have a date field. And remember that it said that the date field had to output something that looked like a date. So if I give this URL to Web2Cit and Web2Cit returns something that doesn't look like a date, then that field is not going to be a valid field. And if that field was required, then the template is not going to be applicable. But just don't worry about this. We may come back to this later. But so I said Web2Cit is going to try one template after the other. So it will try template number 1. In this example, let's imagine that it's not applicable. It will try template number 2. Let's imagine that it's not applicable either. For these cases, Web2Cit will always have a fallback template, just in case. And that template is always going to be applicable. And whenever it finds an applicable template, voila, it's going to return a citation. Okay, that was lots of information, but I think this is going to help us use Web2Cit. So do we have some question about this? I'm sure we have some questions about this.
Yeah, maybe just checking in also that everyone understands the purpose of Web2Cit, what it does. You understand what a domain is. You more or less were able to follow through what Diego was explaining.
Yes, and please, we encourage to make whatever question, no matter how silly you think the question is, because this is the first time we're giving this workshop. So for someone like me or like Evelyn, who we have been working with this for almost a year already, many of these terms might seem like familiar, but you know, when you know something, at some point you assume that everyone's know what you know, and that's not good. So please, just whatever question you may have, please go ahead.
Yeah, and also if you need Diego to speak slower, let us know. Anything. I see Rebecca did a thumbs up.
Okay. Anyway, I'm sure this is going to be clearer when we go to the specific example. And I'm sorry if maybe this might not seem like very important at this stage. I think this is important to understand what we will do later. But I hope you follow me. And just one more final thing. So up to here, we saw this. This that we are seeing on screen is what we have just seen in the previous slide. No additions. Be aware that in addition to translation templates, in Web2Cit, we may define translation tests. So these translation tests are defined for specific web pages, and they simply say, so we may have, I'm going to skip this. They simply say, each field, what are we expecting to get? What is the expected output for each field for a given test web page? So for example, for the field item type, we may say that the translation goal is a single value, like, I don't know, web page. That's the expected output for the item type field. And then, for example, for the author last field, we may say that the goal are multiple values, because maybe we have 2 authors. So we would want to have 2 last names here in this field. And we may also say, for example, for the published by field, that is who published the web source, we may explicitly say that we are expecting nothing for this field. So in that case, the translation goal, the expected output would be an empty array of values. And it is important to understand that we may have a test field, that the test fields and template fields, the test translation tests and translation templates are independent. So in this case, we may have a web page for which we defined a template and a test. But we may also have web pages for which we define templates, but we did not define tests, or the other way around. We have web pages for which we do have tests, but we don't have templates, okay? But that's it for this more like theoretical introduction. Let me introduce, before we go to the exercise, let me finally introduce what we call the Web2Cit ecosystem, because Web2Cit is actually made of multiple parts. We will be referring to these parts, so I wanted to tell you what these parts are before getting started. So the main, the core, the heart of Web2Cit is its core. That's like the engine. Everything that Web2Cit does, it's done by its core. Then we have a storage. This is where we save our configurations. Like Web2Cit is going to have lots of contributors. These contributors are going to be defined in translation templates, translation tests, translation URL path patterns. This is going to be saved to our storage. Then we also have, the image is not showing, but doesn't matter. We also have a translation server. A translation server is like, it's what provides the capabilities of the core to the end user. End users will not be using the core directly. We're going to be using the core of Web2Cit through the translation server. And the translation server, we can use it from different parts. So for example, we can use it from Wikipedia. We can use the translation server from Wikipedia to get a citation from Wikipedia through Web2Cit. And for that, we also have something that it's the user script that makes this easier. We're going to show how the user script makes this easier in a minute. But we not only can use the translation server from Wikipedia, we can also use it, for example, from third-party software like Zotero. If any of you use Zotero, the reference management software, software, you will be able to use Web2Cit from Zotero too. And Web2Cit also uses the translation server from something that's called the monitor. But it's going to be checking regularly what's the health of Web2Cit. Like, it's going to check the translation tests that collaborators defined, and it's going to see if they are working okay or if they're not working okay. So that's going to monitor the health of Web2Cit. But this is currently not implemented. We're going to be doing this in just a couple months. And finally, we have a translation editor. This is the part of Web2Cit that we will use to read and write storage. Yeah. So, like, if we want to change the configurations of Web2Cit, we will use a translation editor to do that. Currently, the translation editor has limited capabilities. We're going to be improving the translation editor. So right now, we don't have the monitor yet, and the editor is currently very preliminary, but it's already functional, and that's why we're having our meeting today. And because it is preliminary, we added 2 temporary components that we're going to be watching today. We added a sandbox for the storage, which means that users trying to play with the configuration, maybe they're not sure, because if you change the configuration, you're changing it for all Web2Cit users. So we enabled a sandbox configuration storage so that you can play around with the configuration before saving it for all users. That's something that we won't need when we have the editor finished, because the editor is going to show you what's happening before you save your configuration. But for now, we have this sandbox. And we also have, and I'm sorry that the icons are not showing, but here there should be a lens, a magnifying lens. We also added a debug component to the translation server. And that's going to help us, until we have the editor ready, diagnose why the configuration that we created might not be working as we expected. But this is how the Web2Cit ecosystem looks like. As I said, right now, the monitor is pending implementation, which is meant to check the health of Web2Cit. And the editor is pending implementation of the final version. But because of that, we added 2 additional components, which are the sandbox storage and the debug endpoint of the server. And that's it for the theoretical introduction. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a question from Drake. Since it's Zotero compatible, is there any chance that it will be communicating with Mendeley data too?
Thank you, Drake. When I say it is Zotero compatible, what I mean specifically is if you have ever used Zotero, or anyone in the audience, is that you will be able to use the Zotero connector, which you install on your browser, so that when you're browsing online, you can import data from the web page to Zotero. Unfortunately, I'm not a Mendeley user for years. I used it before, so I don't know how Mendeley works regarding that. So I'm not sure. If Mendeley is using Zotero translators, then the answer I would say is yes. If Mendeley does have a connector like Zotero does, then the answer, I wonder, it's yes. And the reason for that is because we're going to be showing this, but the server provides some embedded metadata. And if that embedded metadata is understandable by Zotero, maybe it's understandable by Mendeley too. It uses standard metadata. So the answer is maybe yes, but you can check. You can check because it's already out there. So that's it for the theoretical introduction. Do we have other questions up to here, so that we can start with the exercise for today? Okay, well, so let's get started. How do we use? You could look into it since Mendeley has a connector too. Okay, thank you. We can look into it together then, because I'm going to show you how to, we're going to go through the translation server in the demonstration, and maybe you can give it a try and you can let us know what happened. So the first step to use Web2Cit would be to identify a problematic URL. That is, a web page we're having trouble with using Wikipedia's automatic citation generator. I think Evelyn sent my email that if you could, please bring a URL that is having trouble, that you're having trouble with. So mainly, I found one. I found this URL here, and I know that I'm having trouble with it because when I paste it here on Wikipedia's citation generator, and I clicked generate, the metadata was incomplete and incorrect. So I know I'm having a problem with it. So we're gonna try and make this workshop as much as possible in parallel. So I'm gonna be showing stuff, and you're gonna be working with it. So to keep track of what we are doing together, I have prepared a spreadsheet so that all of us can report our progress, and we know at what stage everyone is in. So if you go to the page, to the web page of the workshop, let me see if I can copy it, or do you have, maybe I have it handy somewhere else here. So let me paste this on the chat. This is the page that Evelyn sent you. And you will find in the resources section, you will find there's a link to the spreadsheet we're using to keep track of progress. I prepared this with a Google spreadsheet because it was the easiest I found to, like, in the short time I had to prepare this morning. I'm sorry. I hope it's okay for everyone. So you will get this spreadsheet. The idea for this first part, as I'm showing here in this slide, is that each of you write, like, everyone's going to be using one row of the spreadsheet, and you have to write the URL that you will be using, your name, your alias, your pseudonym, whatever we can use to call you on the chat if you need help, the domain for that URL, and remember that the domain was the first part, and the path of that URL, which was the last part. So please go ahead and do this for the URL that you have chosen. We're going to leave a couple minutes now until everyone's ready.
It's Rebecca is saying that the spreadsheet is view only at the moment. So if you could please share.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm really sorry.
And also, do you have the link so we can share it on the workshop agenda? Yes. Yep. And while Diego I changed is doing it, Rebecca. Yeah, while Diego is doing that, I'll share the Web2Cit problematic URLs spreadsheet. So, yep. I think it should be ready now. If anyone can confirm that you can write on the spreadsheet. Oh, cool. Yeah, we can write now on the spreadsheet. And
so for now.
And wait, sorry, Barakat is saying, I don't have a problematic URL. Well, if you weren't able to find a problematic URL, normally newspapers do not work. And they are the ones that we tend to have more problems with. So pick a newspaper from either your country, your region, or your local city. And try it with the visual editor, see how it's retrieving the metadata. And if it's not retrieving the metadata correctly, then that's a problematic URL. That's our definition of problematic URL.
So remember that this part here, in the URL, this part here, that is after the schema, after HTTPS, it's the domain, and this part here is the path. And one more comment, please choose a specific article. So for example, I'm seeing here that Rebecca chose this URL, but this probably doesn't point to one specific article. I would assume that it's pointing like to the home page. Exactly, very good, thanks Rebecca. So point to a specific newspaper article that you would like to work with.
And if you don't have one, you can always go to the list of problematic URLs and pick one from there.
That's the link that Evelyn sent.
Maybe you can open it on your screen so people can see it.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. This that I'm showing on my screen, for those of you that don't have a problematic URL, it's a list that that some people have been aggregating with URLs that apparently they're having trouble with. So you may pick one of these.
Thanks, Diego.
Well, thank you, Margaret.
Oh, I've just lost it again. Oh, could you bring it up again? I didn't
Sorry?
seem to have. I don't seem to have. I'm not sure which. There's so many links. I don't know which one is which.
Oh, okay.
So
Yeah.
sorry about that. I'm pasting the link again there on the chat. So the Web2Cit workshop spreadsheet is the one that we're going to be working on, and then the other one is the problematic URL.
It's the wrong one. I keep bringing up the wrong one. Blast, damn it. So the problem. This last one is not it, is it? Which is the
last one? The last one is the problematic URLs. That's the one you can find a URL, a problematic URL in case you don't know one yourself.
It's disappearing. I saw it briefly and then I just blasted. Sorry, I'm just not having any luck here. I have to keep disappearing this screen. There.
But
when I go to it, it disappears. To grab something, I can't get there.
Do you mean that are you watching the screen I'm sharing, or you're?
No, I'm bringing up your spreadsheet, and all I'm getting is the spreadsheet to add to. I'm not getting the spreadsheet with the problematic URLs.
Okay.
From that thing at all. I keep taking this very last thing that.
Maybe we can choose one for you.
I can see it. Yes, that would be good because I tried using a news article and of course they're all locked away and so I can't even get to anything.
Oh, all right. Which one? Because I didn't check this list myself.
The Jacaranda Quagoma.
But Kerry had been working with it already.
Kerry's been doing that.
Yeah. Do you know a source, Evelyn, that she may work with?
Here we go. Environment New South Wales is a good one. And Kerry probably hasn't worked on that one because it's New South Wales. But anything to do with Queensland, she probably has. It's just disappeared again. So is there? Where is? Can you choose one for me, please?
Yeah, you said the environment.
Yes, that would be good.
Yeah, we can paste that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you, Evelyn.
Okay, everyone has their URL, right?
No, you haven't popped one in for me.
Yeah, like Diego is pasting it now on the spreadsheet on the Web2Cit workshop.
I can't grab it to do it. I just can't find it. I saw it when you flashed it up, but I cannot get to the thing. If you could pop it in for me, it would be really helpful. And then I can just add the name to it.
Yes, Diego is doing that.
I'll put in my username.
Yep. There. Okay, Constanza has already added hers. And if you're on a computer or maybe you're having
put in my username.
Yes, Margaret. Thanks. Diego will make sure to help with that one. Okay, everyone else, have you picked your source, your problematic URL? If not, let us know if you're having trouble finding one. And I think that, Diego, you can go ahead and show the steps, so we don't take a lot of time in this. And if you have any problem, you can also like contact me privately on the side chat and I'll help you out. You're muted, Diego. You're muted. Diego, you're muted.
I was speaking nowhere like 5 minutes ago. So Margaret, I'm moving your name to row number 4, which is where I pasted the environment.gov at URL. Okay. So what we have 4 URLs. If any of you would like to add a URL, this is the time. If you want to just follow along without doing the steps, that's okay, but we're going to be working with like side by side with those who are following the spreadsheet. So please, in columns C and D, please write the domain of the URL, and on column D, the path. Yeah, so remember the domain. I'm going back to my spreadsheet. The domain is this part here in blue, and the path is the rest of it, the part in pink. So if you could please, in those columns, write the domain and the path, please. Thank you, Rebecca. Please let us know if anyone needs help with this. Thank you, Jime. Koti, Margaret, do you need help with the path or the domain?
I'm checking now.
Okay.
I should let the slash in the end of the domain, or without the slash?
Well, if the original URL had a slash, please leave it there. And the initial slash is very important as well.
Okay.
And also, if the URL contains any query string parameters like question mark followed by something, please leave that as well, because sometimes that doesn't matter, but sometimes it does, and content changes depending on what it says there. So, for example, in Margaret's example, that's one example of that. Probably what comes after the question mark is important, because the web server will provide a different result depending what is after the question mark. Thank you very much, Margaret. Just one minor comment. I'm gonna add at the beginning of the path the initial slash, because the initial slash is part of the path and it's important. Okay, so thank you all. That's it for this first step. Let me go back to our slides. Okay, so the second step would be to try this URL with Web2Cit. So we know that this URL is not working with Wikipedia's automatic citation generator. Does it work with Web2Cit already? Chances are that if nobody worked with it before, it's not gonna work with Web2Cit either, but let's try. And to do this, we're gonna show you how to install Web2Cit user script. This is not something that you have to do yes or yes. You can, there is another way to use Web2Cit, but this is like the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to show it to you, and then we will give some time for you to do it. You will find information about how to do this right here. So always starting from the workshop webpage. Let me, sorry, just let me move here. Always starting from the workshop webpage, where it says additional resources, you will find a link to the Web2Cit user guide. This is under the introduction text. So here is the user guide. And here, down below, it says integrating Web2Cit in Wikipedia. So you will click here to open the user script documentation. And to install the user script, what you have to do is open a file in your Wikipedia. Please make sure that you're logged in with your Wikimedia account. If you don't have a Wikimedia account, don't worry, we will show alternative ways to use Web2Cit. You have to open this common.js file in your Wikipedia. Yeah, and I'm gonna show where this is located. Oh, this is actually, sorry. This is in English Wikipedia, user : your username / common.js. Anyway, if you click on here, it's gonna take you directly there in case you're working with the English Wikipedia. If you're working with another Wikipedia, you would have to do this manually, I'm sorry, because the link only works for English Wikipedia. And here you would edit the page and you're gonna paste this code here. So you're gonna copy this and you're gonna paste it to your common.js. So please go ahead and do it. If you need help with this, just ask us, or you can also read the documentation in the Web2Cit script documentation. And once you're done with that, please in the spreadsheet where it says milestone user script 1, please in your row write something like okay, or if you think you're having trouble with this, you can just write pending or need help or something, so that we know you're having trouble with it. Replying to Saddam's question first, that Google Sheet is not installing in their phone. We apologize for that. If you can follow along, Saddam, without filling in the spreadsheet, that's okay. If you have any questions, just let us know. The spreadsheet is just for us to keep track of what you're doing and help and being able to help you better. And then I'm opening here a question from Rebecca. And she asks if it's okay if it spans 2 lines, and that's okay, perfectly okay. Notice the numbers to the left, Rebecca. Actually, all of that is included in line number 4 of your file. So it hasn't actually spanned into 2 lines. It's just 1 line that it broke the line, but it's perfectly okay like this. Oh, please let us know, Constanza and Margaret, if you need help with this. And again, if you think you're having trouble following us, or you think that this is not the best time for you to be following us for whatever reason, maybe you're doing actually something else and you expected this was going to be just a demonstration video, that's okay. We may just continue, and you can always watch us again, because this is going to be recorded. And Margaret says, where is my common.js? Margaret, do you use English Wikipedia, I assume? You can unmute yourself just. Margaret, assuming that you use English Wikipedia, I'm gonna, you have to just follow this link. Oh, sorry. I'm gonna send you the link, and you just have to replace where it says Diego DLH with DLH, which is my username. You would put there, oh, thank you, Scan. And Koti, let us know if you need help with this. We're gonna wait 1 more minute, and otherwise we will continue, because otherwise we won't finish the workshop. But you can always follow what we're doing, watching the video later on.
Constanza was saying that she had a trouble with her internet, and so.
Oh, okay. Well, but anyway, we can continue, because I mean, it's fine. It's okay if it takes more time for some. We will continue anyway, and remember, you can anyway watch the video later on. So I'm going to continue with the next step. Sorry, now going back to, I'm sorry, I got a little disorganized. So now going back to the Wikipedia editor, now that we have, by the way, I'm sorry, because I was paying attention to what I was saying, and I forgot to install the user script myself. So I'm going to install it, just 1 second. So if I go back to the sandbox where I was working, and I refresh the page, and be aware that to refresh the page, in this case, you have to hit Control F5 in your keyboard to make sure that you wipe your browser's cache. So if you do that, and you click on site, this time it's gonna show this Web2Cit box after you've installed the user script. And this time, if you enter a URL, instead of showing just one result, it's gonna show 2 results. The one above is from the original citation generator from Wikipedia, and the one below is the one generated from Web2Cit. And because we have not configured Web2Cit yet for this domain, the result is just the same as Wikipedia, but we are gonna change this now. So to wipe the browser, Margaret, is Control F5. And okay. So I will continue to the next F as in Frank. It's Control and one of the keys at the top of the keyboard. Yeah, the function keys at the top of the key. Thank you, Rebecca. So the next step would be to go to the Web2Cit translation server to start tweaking the configuration for this domain. How to do that? So from the citation tool, if you installed the user script, you're gonna find a link here that says Web2Cit. So you will click here, and that's gonna take you to the translation server, showing results for the URL that you're working with. So in this case, for my example, it's showing configuration for this domain, and specifically, it's showing translation results for this target URL path. And these are the translation results, the translation output for the different fields for this path. So please, if you may, make sure that you have the Web2Cit user script installed. Try to enter the URL into the citation generator as I just did, and then click down here where it says Web2Cit to open the translation server for your URL, if you may. In case you could not install the user script, there is still a chance to use Web2Cit without installing the user script. And to do that is in the citation generator, instead of entering the URL as it is, you would add at the beginning of the URL the translation server address, which is https://web2cit.toolforge.org. I'm gonna paste it here on the chat, sorry. But this is only if you could not install the user script, or if the user script is not working for you for some reason. And if you have not installed the user script and you want to go to the translation server, which we did by simply clicking on Web2Cit, this is loading, just a second, to go to the translation server. Sorry. Remember that to go to the translation server, you had to click where it says Web2Cit down here. If you don't have the user script installed, you can just go to the modified URL with the https://web2cit.toolforge.org address. That's also gonna open the translation server for you. Yeah, if I go to that URL, that's also gonna open the translation server. All right. So I'm gonna continue from here. The next step at this point, and this was actually, as I said, this is the first time that we're delivering this workshop. We were not sure how much time this was gonna take. I'm not sure we will be able to continue like in parallel as we were until now, because I understand this is taking us longer than I expected. So I'm gonna show this very slowly so that you can follow along later on. I think this is gonna be better, because otherwise we may risk not finishing the workshop, and I'd rather finish the workshop rather than finish it earlier. But I'm gonna try and do this as slowly as possible. So the first step would be to add a translation test for the web page. Remember, a translation test is defining the expected output for that web page. So this would be milestone 2. Whatever, if you want to continue following us, you can go to the spreadsheet, and once you finish with milestone 2, you just enter done there. But I'm gonna show you how to do it. So back on the translation server web page, you will see this edit button below where it says expected output. So if I click here, it open a form, then that's gonna let me enter the translation tests for the web page that I'm working with. So first step, I'm gonna add a translation test. I'm gonna tell Web2Cit what is the path of the web page that I'm loading as a test. In my case, the path is this part here, but you will have different paths depending on the web page you're working with. So that's the path. And then I'm gonna start adding fields with the expected output. So I add a new field. I will get started with the item type field, and I'm gonna add an expected output. So in this case, this is a newspaper article. So I'm gonna choose from the drop-down newspaper article. I will continue with the next field. In this case, I'm gonna choose the title, and I'm gonna add a new value for the title, and I'm just gonna copy paste the title from here. So remember, here we are defining the expected output for the test web page. So I will continue with the next test field. This time I'm gonna add a list of author last names. We may include last names and first names separately, or we may just include the full name altogether. If we decide to include the full name altogether, we will use the author last names field. In this case, I'm gonna include them separately. So I'm gonna add a new value for the last name. And in this case, the last name of the author is Ingram. So I'm gonna copy it from here and paste it on the form. Then I'm gonna add a new test field. Oh, sorry. This time I'm adding the author first names. I add a new value for the author first names, and I copy the first name from here. It's Matthew. I'm going to actually write it down because it's a link. I'm not being able to copy it. Matthew. Then I continue with the next field, this time the date field. And the date field, beware, here it says, I have to input a date that matches one of these patterns. So, for example, 4 digits for the year, 2 for the month, and 2 for the date. Yeah, so I go back to my web page. It says May 5th, 2022. I will enter that as 2022, May 5th. Did I say? Yeah, good. So I add a new field now. I will continue with the published in field. That is, what is the name of the newspaper where it was published? So I add a new value, and this time I enter the name of the newspaper, which is Columbia Journalism Review. So I write that down here, Columbia Journalism Review. And finally, I'm not going to add a published by field because usually for newspaper articles, the name of the editorial is ignored by Wikipedia. I may add it if I want it, but there's a chance that Wikipedia is not going to take that into account. I'm going to add a language field. And for language fields, Web2Cit expects a language code this way, either 2 letters or 2 letters followed by a specific region. So in this case, this is English, so I'm going to enter EN for English. Once I've finished, at the bottom of the form, I have the chance to save this configuration. So remember, from the slide here, let me go back to that slide. When we were watching the ecosystem, sorry, just one second. When we were talking about the ecosystem, we said there was a storage. We're not going to save the tests that we have defined to our storage, okay? So back to the form, I clicked on review changes and save. This opens the wiki text editor, and it's telling me, okay, if you continue, this is the configuration file that's going to be saved. Because we created this configuration file with the form, we assume this is okay. I will just publish these changes. Now, you may wonder why we're doing this. Well, this is understanding tests is not yet supported by Web2Cit, but it will be supported soon. And as I was showing in the ecosystem slides, these tests are going to be used by the monitor to check the health of Web2Cit. So it is very important that you define tests, because that's the only way we will have as a community to decide if the Web2Cit translation system is working okay or not. So do we have, by the way, let me, sorry, but I'm making a mess here. Let me go back to the slides where we were, which is right here. We were here at this milestone, which was milestone number 2. If any of you have been able to follow along and were able to define test, that is expected outputs for your web pages, cool. Otherwise, you can do it at home, and please send questions if you have any. I will continue with the next step. So now we've defined tests. We now have to define translation templates, because so far we told Web2Cit what was the expected output, but we didn't tell Web2Cit how to get that output. Yeah. So the next step would be to define translation templates. So I will go back now to the translation server. Let me just close some extra tabs. So this is the translation output that I got from Web2Cit. And again, as I said before, because no one had worked with this before, the translation output was as wrong, as incomplete as the one that we were getting with Wikipedia's automatic citation generator. But with Web2Cit, we can change this. And the way to change that is to define a translation template. And to define a translation template, we will click here where it says edit. I click there. This is going to open a very similar form to the one we were working with just a minute ago. But instead of using it to define a test, we will use it to define a translation template. So we start adding a new translation template. This time again, in the path, we will write the path of the URL we are working with. So I've closed it. I'm going to open it again. It was this path here. Thank you very much, Drake, for your comment that you successfully installed and tested the tool. So here we have the path for the web page that we're working with, that we're using as a translation template. Next step would be to add a new field. So we will get started with the item type field. And this time we will add one translation procedure. Remember that translation procedures had a series of selection steps, followed by a series of transformation steps. So I added a translation procedure, and now I will add a selection step. And now the question, I'm sorry, I'm going back to my slides. We are here, milestone number 3, defining an item type field in the translation template. So usually, Wikipedia's automatic citation generator gets this wrong. This is what was happening in our case. It said it was a web page, but actually it should have been a newspaper article. So because the type of item usually doesn't change from the, within a single domain, and what I mean with this is most likely all web pages that I find in Columbia Journalism Review are going to be newspaper articles. So the safest here would be to use a selection step that's called the fixed selection. The fixed selection will always return the same value. It doesn't matter what the web page looks like. And in this case, we have to write here in the configuration of the steps of the selection step what value we want it to return. And that value should be one of the values supported by the item type field. And if we check the form, you will see that that information is up here. When we started working with the item type field, it gave us a URL that we could follow to check what are the item types that are supported. I know that one of the supported values is newspaper article. Actually, that was the value that we entered in the tests phase just a few minutes ago. So I will configure this as the selection step. And because this value is already valid for this field, then I don't need to add any transformation steps because that's already valid. So I can just continue with the next field, with the next template field. And here I will stop. Do we have, I know this is complex. Do we have, however, any question that you would like to ask at this point?
Hello, I wanted to ask, especially about the configuration where you put newspaper article. Should I just, isn't it possible for it to be a menu kind of thing so that I just pick which kind of it is instead of typing there?
That's a very good question. Actually, right now, with the way how we have implemented the visual editor, no, you have to manually type it in. When we have the visual editor and the final version, you will be able to choose from a drop-down menu. But at this point, you would have to go to the URL that you have up here and choose one of the item types that that correspond to the web page that you're working with and type it in manually. I'm sorry for that. Yes, Ken.
I also have a question. So when it says template field 1, it really doesn't matter what the order, right? Like I could start by putting like item type field and then go by the date and then it will rearrange itself, right?
Exactly. It doesn't matter the order because in the end, the citation metadata that you get, Wikipedia is gonna make sure that it automatically formats it into a nice format, but it doesn't matter the order how you specify here. Thank you for your question. So I will demonstrate a couple more translation fields, template fields, sorry. I'm not gonna show all template fields because we will run out of time otherwise. So I continue now with the next template field, and I'm gonna choose now the title. Here, very briefly, it reminds us that the title accepts as a valid output whatever string, that is whatever text that is not empty. Yeah, so whatever text that says something, it's gonna be a valid title. So we will add a translation procedure, we will add a selection step, and this time, remember that the title, at least for my source, the title was okay with Wikipedia's automatic citation generator. We don't have to change that. We can reuse what Wikipedia with the automatic citation generator was returning. To reuse that, we choose the citoid selection. The citoid selection reuses whatever citoid, which is what the automatic citation generator uses, returns. And in this case, in the configuration field, we have to tell what specific field of the citoid response we want to reuse. Because in this case, we're working with the title field. That's the field that we want to reuse from citoid. So that's what I'm gonna write down here. So what we are saying with this is, for the title field, which is the field I'm working with, select whatever citoid is returning as a title, because that was already good enough. And because that was already good enough, we're not gonna add any transformation steps for the title field. Going back to my slides, milestone 4, that's the title field. Sometimes citoid returns something that is almost correct. Like it's quite often that it returns the title, then followed by a pipe, which is like a vertical bar. Then it says something else, and we don't want to keep that. So in those cases, it might be good to apply the selection step, the citoid selection step first, and then a transformation step that removes that additional part from what citoid was returning. But in my case, that's not needed, because in my case, citoid was returning the title that I wanted in the end. And if you are gonna check these slides later on, what it says here under possible procedure is just what is most usual. Like usually for the item type field, you will use the fixed selection step, but you might have a different scenario. And here for the title field, usually you will use the citoid selection step, and you may follow it by a split and a range transformation step. We haven't explained this yet. And in case you need to reuse the citoid response, as I just did, this is where, for the title field, this is where usually the title is in the citoid response. So in this case, both fields match, but in some cases they don't. So this is what you have to put in the configuration of the citoid selection step if you're using a citoid selection step for this field. And I'm just gonna show one more field, which is possibly the most complicated fields, which are the author fields and the date field. And you're gonna find out soon why they are more complicated. So I'm gonna choose here the date field. That's what I'm gonna start working with. I'm gonna add a procedure, and I'm gonna add a selection step. So far, that's what we have been doing for the other fields. But can we use a fixed selection for that? Well, probably not, because we don't know beforehand what's going to be the date for a target web page. And remember, this is just a translation template. So we might get the date right for this target web page. When we give Web2Cit another web page with a different publication date, if we are using a fixed selection step, then it's going to return always the same value, and that's not what we want. Can we use the citoid selection? Well, in this case, we cannot use either. We cannot use that either, because as we saw, citoid was not returning a publication date for this source. So the other selection step that is currently supported, we plan to add more selection steps in the future, is the XPath selection. The XPath selection is a way to select a part of the web page. Yeah, so for example, this is the web page I'm working with. If I want to select this part here, to do that, I can use the XPath selection. To use XPath selection, you will have to know a little bit about XPath expressions. We're not going to be talking about XPath expressions in this workshop because that's out of scope. But very briefly, an XPath expression is a way to, without ambiguity, point to a specific part of the web page. There are different ways to get an XPath expression for one part of the web page, but an easy way is to hit F12 on your keyboard, on your browser. This is going to open what's called the inspector of the browser. And you will be able to select with this button here, the node that includes the text that you're interested in. And if you go here to the right, and you right click on that node, you will have the chance to copy and paste the XPath to that node. This is probably the most complicated part of the current way of using Web2Cit. This of course will get easier when we have the visual editor, and you may also find some browser extensions that help you get an XPath for a specific part of the web page. But the easiest way, without installing anything else, is by opening the inspector by clicking F12. So I have copied XPath, I go back to the form, and I can just paste the XPath here. Be aware that the XPath that the browser returns is usually not the best XPath that you can get, because it might happen that when the web page changes, the XPath will break. So we recommend that you, if you're interested in this, that you try and read a little bit more about XPaths, because there are ways to make the XPath expression a little bit more robust. So for example, in my case, because this is an element that's called small, below an element, a section element with this ID, I can redefine that XPath this way. It would be get a section element that has an ID called story info, and get the first small element that is a child of that parent element. This is the most technical thing I'll say in this workshop. Please, if you want to know more about XPath, you can go and read some resources. And remember that when we have the final visual editor, hopefully this will not be needed to manually define an XPath. And finally, that's for the selection part of this procedure. But because this selection path is going to select the text like this, and because the date field, as we saw before, has to have one of these formats, we have to transform what we selected. And luckily, Web2Cit has a transformation step that's called the date transformation, that takes a date in whatever format you give it, in a natural language format. And if you define in the configuration what language that date is in, so in our example is English, because it said May 5th, 2022, it will automatically try to return a date in the format that Web2Cit is expecting. And for this field, which is the item-wise field, I'm not going to explain this in detail, but if you don't know what to write here, you can just hover on this information icon, and it will tell you what is the default value that you should use for the transformation step that you're using. So for the date transformation, it says that the suggested value is true, so I'm going to change that to true. So as I said, I'm not going to continue adding additional steps, because additional fields, because otherwise we will run out of time. Let's see how I save this configuration. So I go down again, and if I save this to this path, which is the default path, it's going to be saved to the main storage, and that's going to change behavior for all Web2Cit users. While I'm playing with configuration, I would recommend that you save it to your personal storage, to your sandbox storage. And to do that, you will enter here user : your username /. So that's going to save the configuration to your personal sandbox. You click here where it says review changes and save. Again, it's going to tell me what changes it's going to make. I will just hit publish. And that saved the configuration to my sandbox. So if I go back to the translation server, now let's try this configuration. First of all, I have to tell Web2Cit that it has to use the configuration in my sandbox, not the main overall configuration, but my custom configuration. So to do that, I enter my username here again, and I tell Web2Cit to switch to using that configuration instead. And here are the translation results using the procedures that we have just defined. So for the item type, it is no longer returning web page. It is now returning newspaper article. That's what we defined in the translation procedure. For the title, it's returning what cited return because we used a cited selection step. And for the publication date, it is returning the expected date after applying the XPath selection step and the date transformation step. Of course, we are missing the other fields because we didn't have time to define them. But if I'm happy with the configuration, I can now save it to the main storage. If you're not happy with the configuration, you can just click here where it says edit and edit again until you're happy with it. And if you are not sure why you're not getting the results that you expected, you also have the option of enabling debugging, as I anticipated before. And here you can see exactly what happened. What translation templates were used? Were they applicable or not? What was the output of each selection step? What was the output of each transformation step? And that way you can spot where the problem might be. But in my case, everything worked as expected. So I will click here on edit again, because I want to save this to the main storage. So I will not make any further changes. And at the bottom of the form, I will remove this part that I added so that I can save the configuration to the main storage. I remove that part. I click on review changes and save. And now it's going to show me again what changes are going to be saved, this time to the main storage. So I just click publish changes. And now I can go back to the translation server and tell it to switch back to using the main configuration, no longer the sandbox configuration, because I'm happy with it already. So switch back to the main configuration. And we will see now that Web2Cit is returning the expected results using the main storage configuration. So now we are ready for our final step, which is here, insert the citation in Wikipedia. So I go back to my sandbox. I copy the URL, the original URL. I don't have to change anything. I paste it here and I click on generate. And this time, the first citation is going to be the one that it created using Wikipedia's default automatic citation generator. Oh, this is suspense. Okay, good. And the second citation is the one that we defined using Web2Cit. Of course, this is incomplete because we didn't have time to define a procedure for all templates. But when the call finishes, I can just continue adding template fields in the form so that all fields are covered. And if I click on insert, then it's going to insert the citation with the correct metadata. And of course, this would be useless if this was helpful just for the translation template that I was working with. The idea is that this is going to work for whatever web page from that domain. So once I took the work to define translation templates and to define translation procedures for one translation template web page, it's going to work for whatever other web pages in the same domain that have the same shape. So for example, if I change to another, let me show this. If I change to another article in this web page. So for example, let's go to this one. Yeah. So I'm gonna.
Diego, sorry to interrupt, but Rebecca and I are having the same problem. Like she said
Okay.
to her user space, but when she tries to switch in Web2Cit, she gets an internal error, and I'm having the same issue too.
Okay. All right. I'm okay. Let's check that. Let me follow Rebecca's link. So when I'm pretending like I'm Rebecca here, so I'm just gonna paste her username here to switch configuration. I'm not getting that error, Rebecca. We can check this later on. I've copied your username. I went to the translation server. I entered the username here in this field. Is this what you're doing? I clicked on switch, and I'm getting the results. Maybe this is something that I'm not saying that. Okay, it's showing internal server error for everyone. That's completely unexpected. Rebecca, can you please copy the URL of the web page where you're getting this internal server error, please? Like, can you copy and paste it on the chat so that I can check the URL? Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting the same. Yep, I'm getting that same thing. You're muted, Diego. You're muted.
Diego, you are muted.
I'm sorry, folks. What I was saying is, I was checking that, but it seems that it wasn't muted all the way along, all the way. So I apologize for this. I'm gonna work on this to fix it when the call finishes, but don't worry. Anyway, the configuration is saved. What you can do, Rebecca, I'm gonna explain how to fix this, but this is not gonna be a problem in the future. What you can do to fix this, let me check. Again, I'm sorry for this inconvenience. Let me check where the error is. I'm sorry, folks. Okay, I'm gonna look into this. It is good that we're doing this workshop in a way because most of this has not been thoroughly tested yet, and we need to test this. So please, I'm gonna save the chat where you're having trouble with this. It seems to be missing the debug, but that shouldn't be. Troubleshooting live is very hard. Thank you, Rebecca, for your understanding. I thank you all for your understanding. I'm gonna fix because we're almost on time. I understand, so I don't want to take any time from you anymore. But when we finish this call, I'm gonna fix this right ahead. I'm gonna try and spot where the problem is. As you saw, for some reason, I wasn't getting the error for the example that I was following. For some reason, we're getting the error for other examples. I'm gonna look into this and fix it. What I just wanted to show you so that I can finish with that part is that this should actually work for whatever other web pages in the same domain. So if I cite this other web page from the same domain, it should apply the translation template that I defined before, and it should extract the metadata following the same procedures. And again, like to recap, I'm sorry for the inconvenience you experienced with this internal server error. We haven't tested Web2Cit enough yet and the reason was because it wasn't ready. Now that it's ready and that we can show it to you, we can test it. So, and for the final slide, if you find any issues, like the issue that you just found, please post those issues if you can, either to the discussion page of the Web2Cit page, or to, if you know how to use Fabricator, please open a ticket on Fabricator using the Web2Cit tag so that we can fix those issues. For the ones that you have detected today, no problem. If Scan, can we save the chat so that I can, okay, thank you. Scan is gonna save the chat so that I'm gonna paste the URLs that you were having trouble with Web2Cit translation server, and I'm gonna fix them. And you want to follow the news of, because as I said, Web2Cit is not yet 100% ready. We still have to add some selection and transformation steps, and we still have to create the visual editor. So if you want to get news of Web2Cit, we are going to send you emails when we have updates, but you can also in Web2Cit, in the web page of Web2Cit, which is in Meta, you will find a news and update section. We're going to be posting news and updates there, so you can just watch that page so that you get the news and the updates here. And please apologize for not having enough time to do this in full. And I really thank you for your understanding. I can stay here if someone needs to stay, but I wanted to close it because we're on time. We are at the time that we should have finished, and maybe some of you have to go.
Yeah, Diego, so before we leave, please remember to complete the survey that I'm pasting there on the side chat so we can improve the workshop. And why don't you leave people your email on the side chat? So if anyone wants to follow up with you, they can also write you an email. Yeah,
sure. My email, I'm gonna write it in, I'm writing it on the chat, which is here, delaera@gmail.com. But anyway, as I said, if you want to, you can just open a new discussion on the Web2Cit page, but it's perfectly okay for me if you write by email. And thank you all for your understanding, and for those of you that would like to stay for questions, I'm also available.